Hi, everyone. Can you? Hi. Is that working? This is not working that much. Hey, honey, can we turn this up to like a tiny bit? Maybe is it? Oh, we have to work. I have to like have my actual mouth on the microphone. It's not very hygienic, though. That's my only concern. Hello. Okay. Let's just. Oh, there we go. Hell yeah. Okay. Here we are, day 2. How's everybody have a good day? Spectacular? We're snapping it out because we're trying to resist clapping at every single opportunity. I'm a big fan of clapping and snapping because I like to show appreciation. Yeah, I've heard. I like to show appreciation. I don't think there's anything. I'm not going to apologize. We have a great, certainly not going to apologize for our lineup tonight. We have a great event for you. We're going to hear from Jessica Jacobs. Applause. Right? Does that feel good? And Mark Adams. Really great. Before we begin, stuff tomorrow, speaking of Mark Adams, Mark is doing his walk starting at 1:30 here in the deck, and a big conversation point starting today is being his map that he laid out here this morning, and people don't want to walk on it. That's the big learning point that I've got from is people just don't want to walk on it. Take a chance, walk on it, dance on it. It's gonna be great. Anyway, it's gonna be a talking point, I'm sure, for Mark to get the conversation rolling tomorrow. It's a great talk. He's a wealth of information about both the cultural and the artistic history of P-Town, and he has a lot to share and a charming, funny way of sharing it. So do attend if you can tomorrow, 1:30, not 12:30, 1:30 out on the deck tomorrow. Also tomorrow, student night. Student night. No, wait, Thursday. Wait, the talk is. Hi, everyone. Mark's talk is not tomorrow. It's Thursday. I was making this wishful thinking projection is like, oh, it's Wednesday. But it's not. It's Tuesday. Not that I don't love every single one of you. I'm glad that you're here. Thursday, not tomorrow, is Mark's talk. And Thursday, not tomorrow, is student night. And there's a robust beginning 1.0 kind of sign up going on over there, which I really appreciate. And we have room for, I won't say improvement, but for filling in the gaps on the list. So I will recommend, once again, and I'll probably do this tomorrow too, that you sign up if you haven't already done so, and say bravo. I'm not going to clap. If you've signed up, I need a 12-step. I think there's a 12-step program for clappers, CA. Hi, my name's David. I'm a clapper. It's week 9. I'm sorry. I'm just going to get a bit silly. It's probably the alcohol I had at lunch. No, just kidding. Speaking of 12 steps. Okay, all right. So Jessica and Mark will both be signing books right at that table right there behind you at the end of the event. We have other books from this week's faculty beautifully displayed by our summer program assistant, Hannah Rivers. Can we have a hand for Hannah Rivers, please? Who's just so awesome. Really grateful that she's here. Anyway, great books, merch, stickers, which I will amend my statement from last night from saying they are free to they are free with a purchase or a donation. So doesn't take much, but they're great stickers, and it's worth a donation. And you also get a book. So you could get a sticker if you get a book. Huh, right? So, and go look at the gallery if you haven't, because it's a fabulous summer exhibition to move a mountain curated by Cody Brown's former fellow, consisting of work by about a dozen former fellows. Really great show. Please check it out. It's going to the Armory show after this. We're taking it down in a couple of weeks, and we're taking it straight to New York. So if you're in New York City and you haven't seen it, it's going to be at the Armory show in September. So isn't that awesome? I think so. I'm going to give another shout out, as I always do, to the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod 5 Foundation, because they really help us support our public programming in the summer. Restrooms are still down the hall on the left, and there's still a bubbler there, or a drinking fountain there too also. And turn off your cell phones or mute. Reach into your pocket, double check, because people say, yeah, it's mute, and then their phone rings in the middle, and they're like, fuck, and they go reach for their phone, and it rings four times before they get to it. So I'm going to stop and it is my great pleasure to invite up one of Jessica's students to the stage to introduce Jessica Jacobs. Please welcome Miranda Julia Marks to the stage.
Oh, we're like the same height. It's perfect. Okay. I have the privilege today of introducing Jessica Jacobs. Jacobs is the author of Take Me With You Wherever You're Going, one of Library Journal's best poetry books of the year and winner of the Devil's Kitchen and Goldie Awards, Pelvis with Distance, which is the winner of the New Mexico Book Award in Poetry and a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award, and most recently, Unalone, Poems in Conversation with the Book of Genesis. Jacobs is also the founder and executive director of Yetzirah, a Hearth for Jewish Poetry, the only national nonprofit literary organization whose focus is in creating space for and nurturing Jewish poets and lovers of Jewish poetry. I came to love Jacobs through Unalone, an expansive and brave collection. As intimate as it is erudite, the collection has forever changed what I understand poetry to be capable of. Jacobs is a thorough and researched scholar. The book demonstrates a profound command of biblical Hebrew, as well as philosophical, religious, scientific, and historical texts. Her poems conjure new worlds and allow us to see old ones in a different light. Her use of metaphor has changed the way I see hands and leaves and the very texts I was raised on. Of Jacob wrestling with an angel, she asks, but what is wrestling if not an embrace? I know. Jacob's conversation with Genesis is irresistibly engaging, whether you are a Talmudic scholar, a scripture-avoidant reader, or someone in between. The epigraphs at the start of her poems invite the reader into the text from wherever she stands. As someone who has grappled with my own relationship to Judaism, I know there is always a place for me in her poetry. In our first class, Jacobs posed the question, how can we be in service of ourselves so that we may be in service of the reader? She has mastered the art of poetry so intimate and exact that it becomes universal. Before I came to Provincetown, I knew Jacobs was a masterful poet. This week, I have learned what a talented and supportive teacher she is too. With a syllabus, I should add, that must be the most thorough of any FOC class ever taught. And I'm happy to prove it if you don't believe me. She creates a space for evolving and experienced poets alike to explore the most intimate parts of ourselves and our relationship with the world. And we are so fortunate to have her here. It is my great pleasure to introduce Jessica Jacobs.
All right, by thorough syllabus, she means overwhelming. This is the youngest. I think we have the youngest people in that I've ever had teaching here, and you give me hope for the future. So thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you. And one of the other things that I absolutely love about being here, in addition to David and so much clapping, which is great, and thank you, Hannah, as well, is that I always get to hang out with visual artists who I learned so much from. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Mark. And I just feel like we can get really stuck in our silos and just talk to ourselves, but we can learn so much from the techniques of others. This is a photographer named Leslie Dill, and I was incredibly excited to be commissioned by the Smith College Museum of Art to write a piece in response to this. as a young girl, Leslie was given a copy of Emily Dickinson's poems, and they were incredibly inspirational for her. And as she came into her own art, she would integrate quotes from poets like Dickinson, this is a quote from Dickinson, into her images. And when I started to think about this, I also started to think about triptychs. So if you think about a 3-paneled work and how you can see those 3 images simultaneously and they talk to each other. So I'm going to start with a prayer in response to this. And it's kind of like if you could imagine walking around a room and you get to see different facets of this piece of art. The 2 kind of textual things that I was drawing from is in Judaism, I guess if you ask 10 rabbis, get 11 answers, but there's not really so much an idea of hell necessarily. There's a lot of other ideas of the afterlife, but there's this idea of Gehenna. And Gehenna is more of a limbo. It's a place of reflection. So this, that seemed important for something, photographs, right? Something written in light. And then I was so blown away by this midrashic idea that, when Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, there's, it's commonly said they wore the skins of animals, right? They were naked, they were embarrassed, they had to wear the skins. But the Midrash says, no, they were actually beings made of light, and their punishment was to have to wear skin. Okay. Prayers from a dark room. Gehenna. If hell is less fiery furnace than a mirrored room with all the lights left on, with nowhere to hide that what burns is within us, all the guilt and sorrow from which we now can't look away, then let us accept our faces as they are. Let us remember that one word, doliket, means both in flames and full of light, and know our pain can be a source of sight. 2, I am afraid to own a body. I am afraid to own a soul. In Eden, garments of light sufficed, each human a lantern lit from within, inextricable from their ignition. But now, banished, this dim skin suit by which the spirit is dusked to firefly. Such faint flares, such cold glow. Lonely lighthouses, each of us. We blink, we beacon, we long to chorus, we wait for a blaze in return until there. Allied, we pulse one to the next, bind in divine synchrony. For a moment, the whole planet a field of fallen stars. And from this ensemble bonfire, like smoke scorching from the narrows of a throat, are fears. A cry for not ownership, but communion. A cry to be answered with expanse of air, of wind, of ruach, that God breath, gentling in toward every torn thing, its breach, however meager, moving leaf into leaves, melding body to soul, making of every opening a mouth, and setting us all to singing. Can you hear it? A torch song for the kindred world, this fleeting one we're searching for. 3, prayer for the word made light. Bathe the window within us in photosensitive silver. Let us aperture. Let us dilate. What lasts is what is found by light. negatives of the divine, let us enter the stop bath of the ordinary world, where we are most vulnerable, most exposed. That is what makes the print. We become what is burned into us, what we open ourselves to. Thank you. All right, any other visuals or just in the poems? So yeah, there's no more, sorry. You have to wait for Mark to give you this. All right, we're gonna go like way down into Bummerlit, and then we're gonna come back up. So just brace yourself. And yeah, this is a poem that I sadly have felt compelled to read the last 3 summers I've been here. I feel like we, as I was saying, like we're in our silos artistically, but we're also in our silos in terms of identity, ideology, and instead of actually being in conversation, we're often just like screaming past each other. And so one of the things, I came to the Torah very much as an outsider. I came as someone who was raised in lit crit, and you find what's wrong in a text. And reading a text as though it's sacred means that you can't just throw it away if something offends you or upsets you or is hard to understand, right? It means that you have to sit with something, often the hardest things, until they in some way become your teacher. And so, yeah, this is one of those stories that I just couldn't handle, which is the binding of Isaac, when Abraham is commanded to kill his son. And it opens with an epigraph from Eric Hoffer, who's a philosopher. Miranda's a studying philosophy. Absolute faith corrupts as absolutely as absolute power. Why there is no Hebrew word for obey. What came later was the real trial, because God knew Isaac would not die, while Abraham climbed the mountain believing he would. With conviction tempered in the fires of his faith, he walked up through the shaded valley, his son resolute ahead on the trail. Behind them, Sarah, Isaac's mother, Abraham's wife, a small darkness in the distance, growing forever smaller. He bound his beloved son, pulled back his legs, wrenched back his arms, knotted his ankles to his wrists, and laid him on that altar like a child falling through the sky. He held the knife, knowing from every animal he'd ever sacrificed how his son would jerk and shudder when the blade opened his throat, the familiar smoke of offered flesh. What came later, even with Isaac alive in the fields, inside Abraham was the knowledge of what he'd been willing to do. When they passed in the tent, Isaac rubbed a remembered ache in his shoulder and never again held his father's eye. Sarah, smelling the imagined ashes on her husband's fingers, the blood in the crease of his throat, turned from him in the night. And on every path, Abraham walked from that day forward, his son as he had been, a small back, barely the span of his hand, slung with the kindling meant for his burning. Seconds from the slaughter of the one meant to carry his line of the son he'd wanted all his life, who's to say the voice in his head was God? Judaism is not a faith, but a tradition, and isn't doubt the crux of conscience? Yet what came later on a Sabbath morning, centuries on, was a congregation in Pittsburgh reading this story of Isaac's binding, of Abraham's terrible bind, when a man burning with unquestioning belief, entered with a gun and, with no better angel to stay his hand, opened fire, believing the death of Jews would keep our country safe, believing this massacre, elderly congregants bleeding out on the floor, was God's work. Who would call such actions holy? And how many more times will each of us come down from the mountain, conviction knocking like a knife in our belt loop, stained with all we would have done? My daily gods are minor ones, of pride, of lust, of impatience and complacency. Yet how many have I harmed on the way to what I thought was right, or with hindsight, on the way to what I wanted? And how many sorry sacrifices have I made of myself? What if we turn from certainty and arm ourselves instead with questions? Obey, obey, obey is everywhere in translation. The real word is Shema. Listen. Grab a seat. This text was also, the Torah was also very helpful. We've been talking a lot about metaphors. That's what we're focused on this week, in giving you metaphors to write about things that felt like they were too hard for me to write about directly in some ways. So we're going to stay with Abraham and Isaac. There's a quote from Midrash Tanhuma. "If God has chosen me," Isaac replied, "I shall willingly surrender my soul. But I am gravely concerned about my mother." And this was a poem that I wrote when my mom was first diagnosed with dementia. Kaddish for the living. While Abraham and Isaac were up on the mountain, Satan dropped by to Schrodinger, Sarah. That's actually in the Midrash. Satan comes to talk to Sarah, saying her son was dead, but not. Unable to hang on that particular cliff, her heart plunged over and, before the story's end, stopped. Stopped as a perpetual motion machine given in to its impossibility, though how we love the myth of them, how we believe our bodies are until they abruptly aren't. As the brakes on my bike, which the mechanic said were worn to paper, worn out from working so well for so long, as my mother's mind. Like Isaac, my mother is dead, but not. The automatic operations lost. Driving, turning on a stove, following a plot, while the ingrained etiquette remains. Lawyer, wife, mother, no longer, yet still a sweet shadow in the soundtrack of every call home. In the mourner's Kaddish, death is not mentioned, just praise and petitions for peace. Though only noon, I tuck her into bed, and though she breathes beside me, I am saying goodbye. There is so much guilt in my grief, but oh, I mourn her. I mourn her while I still hold her in my arms, while I fit my body to hers, like a cloak, like a shield, like she taught me. All right, we're starting the slow climb back up. So another teaching about the Torah is that you can read every character as a metaphor for yourself if you want to. So if there's any IFS therapists out there, like internal parts work, so it's super helpful. So I was really taken, there's this quote from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who takes this quote. This is what Midrash does. It kind of looks at the text and then extrapolates, of one nation shall prevail over the other nation, because Rebecca is having a really rough pregnancy. She has twins. And Rabbi Zalman says, this quote refers to Jacob and Esau, and is understood as an allusion to the divine soul and the animal soul, respectively, who are constantly warring with each other. Provincetown feels like a place for the divine soul and the animal soul. Yeah. All right. In the village of my body, two people. In the village of my body, two people vie for the throne, box-sprung and gold-leafed though it is. The firstborn is lusty, muscled, veins cantillating with sun heat, field and flesh. She is all hunger. For a mess of stew, for a burger, she'd give anything, even her birthright. That divine protection for those who curse her are cursed, and those who bless her get God's attaboy, God's divine pat on the back. The second is hermetic, blanched as a leek and wilting at her texts, a root vegetable plucked from darkness into darkness, immaculate poet of the tense. The small Solomon in my gut notes how each runs on the same clean burning will, which in a mortal body is like pure light through a dirty window. It spatters particular shadows. And of what worth is such a birthright anyway? What would it mean if one part of myself, vigor to the point of violence or giving to the point of giving in? If one were blessed beyond the other, granted license to govern and multiply? My belly growls. Small Solomon whispers, it feels better to be kind than right. In a clearing between my ribs, I plant a shade tree, ideal spot for treaties, and hope it grows to block the two rusting water towers of my village's warring sides. One tagged might makes right, the other airbrushed, the meek shall inherit. The tree will wait there, bannering its leaves until my two women can agree to dig one well from which both will draw, balanced, etched on one side and on the other, integration. Thank you. So this one kind of takes on the persona of a biblical figure a little more directly. Jacob is about to go meet Esau, from whom he stole the birthright a very long time ago, and he hasn't seen him for many decades. He's terrified. He sends all of his family, all of his livestock and everything over to one side of the river, and then he spends the night, he sets up camp on the other side of the river. And the famous story is Jacob wrestling the angel, right? And that is when he is renamed. He says, you know, I will hold you till you bless me. And he's renamed Israel, which can be translated as one who wrestles with God, right? A God wrestler. But a more contemporary interpretation of this story is, here is this guy on this incredibly dark night of the soul, and the one that he's wrestling with is himself. So, per integration in the last poem. God wrestling. The river has tasted the salt of your skin, has lapped at your calves with its current. The river has swallowed the press of your steps. There is no record of your crossing. The river is between you and everything you call your life. So you step into a stranger's arms. Your shoulder fits theirs like a bone in its socket. Their jaw notches yours. All around you, a profusion of oleanders beams back the moonlight, offering a carpet of fallen petals. In your arms, all the promises you've yet to keep, all you've done that shames you. But what is wrestling, if not an embrace? It's too dark to see you have the same face, and only like this, cheek to cheek, each looking over the other's shoulder, can you see the world whole. Close at first as a slow dance, you spin and spin, your tracks a tight coin. Matched, you step out, making a spear tip of your bodies. Matched, you step further, levered like rafters, needing the other to stay aloft. Your tracks trace widening circles, ringing out through the fallen blossoms. Names are required only when not alone. This stranger does not give you a new name, just dippers up the true one you tender in your chest. The day is breaking, the night's hold. The far bank is calling. On one side, you, on the other, your life. Join them. Thank you. And I'm just going to end with a return to prayer, which it's called How to Pray, but there should actually be a question mark because it's very confusing to me, and that's been, a process. But it's really, to me, as someone who, I need to go out and be in the world and, sweat a little bit every day, the closest thing that I know of prayer, of connecting, is to be in my body. And this poem is for my workshop. You all are just doing such a beautiful job being embodied and connecting and being curious. So, how to pray. Forget ecstasy, that easy leap outside the body. Our bodies are already up on blocks, listing and unsightly in the yard. No. The way to God is not around the world, but through it. So dig your heels into your heels, flex your fists, your jaw. Then release to become for an instant all ear. Listen out, listen up to branch sawing branch like a giant violin. Listen in. There's your blood's steady loop the loop. Cue eyes, a seizure of light through the leaves, and tongue, slick of iron from a nicked gum, and once again, your 5, last little tooth on its last little strand, wagging with your breath like a swing. Now, nose. Breathe in the dirt, astir as it is with beetles and rot and light-seeking shoots. And finally, be all skin. Like a kid's face pressed to an aquarium window, presence up so hard to the edge of your husk, you are joined with the wind rivering the cool air to silk. Only then should you give yourself to joy. Dive from the twin heights of your eyes. And that tiny pool below, the one you're hurtling toward, it's not God. Well, not exactly. It's you. One breath deeper than you've ever been. One breath closer to the heated, heedful world. Thank you.
Woo! More applause for Jessica Jacobs. Thank you. That was wonderful. And thank you, Miranda, for a lovely introduction. And now, speaking of introductions, I'd like to introduce and bring up to the stage someone you know very well, Hannah Rivers, to introduce Mark Adams. Come on up.
Mark Adams is a painter and cartographer showing at the Schoolhouse Gallery in Provincetown, who has 30 years' experience in the National Park Service. He has exhibited installations, prints, photography, scientific illustration, and video art, and he was named Artist of the Year by the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod. Woo! More applause. His retrospective expedition was at the Provincetown Art Association Museum in 2017. He has traveled with a sketchbook in hand around the Mediterranean, South America, Asia, and U.S. wildernesses, and has illustrated and co-authored a geologic primer, Coastal Landforms of Cape Cod, with Center for Coastal Studies geologist Graham Giese. Mark is a very wonderful and valued member of our FOC community here, so please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Wow, great. Thank you for that, and thank you for the poems. I'm so interested in that whole idea of how the animal body has a spiritual body. It's really runs through my concerns, and even as a scientist, it's so important to be a good animal and have an inner. You know, Nick has no inner life. He told me. What is that? What you said? Okay. Oh, inner dialogue. The inner dialogue. Constant inner dialogue. Yeah. But some of us. It's good to be. Yeah. Anyway, that's my deflecting for the moment. I was. Sorry. I'm gonna. Let's. This is a question that's been on my mind for a couple of years. I just can't let go of it because there was a panel discussion last year about what is an artist, and I'm like, what an absurd question. Because the real question is, what can art do? And you know, there's a lot of focus on art as a commodity, but it does a lot of things for everybody. Everybody who practices art, you know, it's a therapeutic practice. It memorializes and sanctifies. It's part of our collective experience. But most of all, I like to think of art as a transcendence machine. And there's this whole mystery on the Cornell boxes is like what all these ordinary things thrown together in a box that create somehow transcendence. And so that's one of the things that I strive for. So a little bit about the map, and I'm gonna organize this around places. This is the Gulf of Maine. If you come to the little walk on Thursday, I'll go in more detail and you'll get to measure the map with your feet. But this is so often we tell the geologic story of New England, of the world, without people in it. And the most important geologic events that shaped Cape Cod and shaped New England, people were present. I always ask, when did the first humans arrive here? And it's a question that doesn't get asked much unless you are among the first people. But, you know, basically, we have evidence of people here 12,000 years ago. And if you ask the Wampanoag, they'll say, well, we were always here. But this map shows what the landscape was like 12,000 years ago when the first humans arrived, in the sense of sea level was about 200 feet lower, so all the yellow areas were upland, dry land, forests, and there was this population of megafauna that was quickly disappearing, mastodons and mammoths. But these were the people, these were the animals that people encountered and lived with. This is, you know, imagine being a 12-year-old girl here 12,000 years ago and being the same kind of human that we are now, but and living maybe a similar life, but in this different environment. So I'll talk more about that on Thursday. And also, just to show you, this is the 24,000 years ago on the far side of the graph, 0,000 years ago on this side, and 12,000 in the middle. So you can see that that's sea level rise. You can see that we were only halfway there to the present condition. Now, if we extended it up in the corner, the right-hand corner shows the hockey stick curve of sea level rise that is coming and is yet to come. I don't need to say too much more about that. But, you know, evidence of this human occupation on the shelf in the teeth of mammoths, the pottery and material evidence of humans goes all through the shelf of the Atlantic coast. This is from the Pequot Reservation, Mashantucket. And also, so recently, you know, so many events coincide, and the 4th of July was a time that we were like kind of scratching our heads about how to celebrate. And they asked me in the newspaper to make a drawing that commented on our foundation documents. And this piece of wampum that I drew was basically recorded, so there was an oral tradition of this Haudenosaunee Confederation, the unification of the Iroquois tribes, the 6 tribes, I believe. And that constitution was recorded in the beads of a wampum belt that's still in a vault in, I think, Saratoga in upstate New York, in possession of the tribe. So this was the constitution that was told orally, and the beads were aids to memory on recounting that. And so it was in the newspaper along with a couple other founding documents that you might have heard of. And there is evidence that Ben Franklin and James Madison had talked to the leaders of these tribes and were influenced somewhat. There's interesting differences in kind of the foundation of consensus government, matriarchal decision-making that appointed tribal leaders. It's so interesting to look into. So we can't discount the tribe. So then let's just talk about my fantastic class. I have a super talented crew. They're like amazing me every day. And one of the things we're doing with the class is, here's our today's work, is like doing these reflections and drawings, blind observations, blind contour drawings, observations in nature, and also an exercise that I call environmental autobiography, where we kind of catalog the places that shaped us. So it's all about your own geographic history that has shaped you, given you a psychology of place, and given you kind of a vehicle for how to appreciate the world, how to be your own kind of good animal in the world. So those are just some of my own demonstration drawings from the class, and also this is a page of sketches from the time of Thoreau, places that are on the Cape that are still kind of reminiscent of Thoreau's Cape Cod, of the landscapes that he encountered, and this was actually done for Eileen Miles' recreation of the Thoreau walk, which then was also in the library, in the bookstore here, is illustrated by Cole Barash's fantastic photographs. Let's see, I'm going to breeze through. And then the sketchbook is also a vehicle for exploring and making contact with people. I'm very interested in human ecology as a part of our historical journey, our placemaking. This is a Statue of Liberty on Lesbos, and it's a gathering place for refugees. I was there as the pandemic came down, and now things have changed quite a bit. But I used my sketchbook to interview and document people that I met. There's a Palestinian gentleman. He's about 18 years old. He had saved an entire boatload of people that was sinking. The story of refugee journeys is harrowing, and it continues. It's never end. He grew up in a refugee camp in Lebanon. Then he ended up in Greece, and I don't know where he is now. But I'm kind of using the book to shine a light on some of these people. Hanai is now has a salon in Germany, and also another function of the sketchbook is, if you can, to use it in real time to participate in protest events and gatherings. The whole witnessing function is kind of really a fulfilling thing. and down. I went also to the U.S.-Mexican border, crossed into Matamoros, and talked to this guy from Honduras, and looked at the camp, delivered. You know, everyone's like, "Don't go; it's kind of dangerous." And this woman who pulls up with her station wagon and says, "Well, we're going if you want to come." And so we went to the Costco and got like 50-pound bags of rice and drove across and went right into the encampment in Matamoros and talked to people. Okay, so now shifting gears. This is sort of a grab bag of things I've done lately. I wish that it had more of a theme, but working a lot as the artist in residence at the Center for Coastal Studies, we're doing plastic removal from the ocean, doing a lot of awareness around that. We camped out in Paddocks Island, Boston Harbor, and we tore out of the brush about 10 tons of lobster traps, ropes, plastics, and sorted it in a dump in Hull. Super fun. And then we made an installation. Let's see. So actually this is another island, Cuttyhunk Island in Buzzards Bay, where we did a similar thing. And I was like, how do I make a montage out of my drawings and the photographs and help to tell the story? So these are a few of the montages I made with maps. And then we had a community event where we were like, let's make something out of this trash. And so we had a 4-day maker session at the Commons, and people came in and made sculpture. They made clothing. They made costumes. There's a fashion show coming up in the end of the month using some of this stuff. Obviously, it doesn't remove much from the ocean, but it raises awareness and it gives you kind of a material way to work with the stuff. I don't know. Let's see. Part of that. Okay, so another project is working on coastal resiliency for the town. Let's see. So I droned with the harbor master. We droned low tide and high tide. This was in the one of the Friday salons here at the Work Center in February, and you just kind of get a glimpse here. But we droned at low tide and high tide to kind of get a sense of where the water goes, and hung the sail in the terrace with quotes about the ocean. And actually one of the pieces from that appeared at a gathering at Nick's Barn, where we had several esteemed poets, Marie Howe in the darkness there, reading in front of one of the backdrops from that event. Let's see. So this coastal resiliency idea allows me to work with tide data and water level data to and along with town committees to say, what is the future going to be like? And I'm not going to go into that much, but yeah, all right, I'll go into it for a second. You know, how do we adapt? How do we accommodate these changes that are happening, whether we like the explanation or not? You know, some of it involves accommodation, building differently, adapting buildings. Some of it involves retreat. But there's no doubt that we will be here in 50 years and we'll be here in 100 years. This town, there's a reason we're here, and those reasons won't go away. There's still equity issues, there's money issues, and it's very important that we find a way to keep everyone here and keep it the kind of equitable space that it is, or at least it aspires to now. And speaking of that, the Park Service had canceled, you know, the orders came down to cancel all the DEI programs. And this was a field trip, a 2-day field trip of 25 kids from Chelsea, mostly Hispanic kids. And we were like, okay, that's been canceled. How do we keep it going? So we got donations from, let's see, the Crown and Anchor gave us hotel rooms. We got Spiritus Pizza. We got Angel Foods. We got the East End Market. We got free boat tickets. And it turned out to be 24 Latina women, one guy. And we had a 2-day field trip that involved beach walks and This is the Center for Coastal Studies, where a couple of my maps reside. There's a story of this stranded humpback whale that's hanging in the ceiling was rescued many times entangled in ropes and fishing gear. And so it's a fantastic arena to talk and draw with the kids. This is another, I did a bunch of illustrations for an anthology of poetry and writing about the Gulf of Maine, which is coming out soon. So these are just a couple of pages of that. And then, how do you deploy all the arts for some purpose, and give them meaning in a sense of issues that we care about? This is a group that called the Site-Specific Dance, that they did a workshop here and a bunch of places throughout town, and staged this dance performance on the beach called Erosions. And it was all about what we're losing. And, I don't know. I don't know if art can always bring some kind of meaning and insight, but as an artist in residence, I think that's my responsibility to participate in every effort to, let's skip the cicadas. I'm just gonna, let's see. One of the things I'm working with now is this idea of one world, one ocean. And I thought about this, and of course someone else thought about this. In 1942, Athelstan Schoolhouse made this projection of the globe that connects all the oceans with Antarctica in the middle. And so I'm going to use this as a new base map. Maybe it'll be in the terrace here at the Work Center next year. It's a fascinating way to look at the world. And there's a couple of paintings I'm working on about rescue and partnership between people and animals. Mishan is the Wampanoag name, both for a dugout canoe and also for the location at Race Point. And just a couple other drawings. The border is here. Let's see. Okay, and then just to close, I'm working on a little memoir about disasters and experiences that I've had working on disasters. And let's see, my first job out of college was as a forest firefighter in California. And, it's a really gritty, real experience. And then a couple of the other chapters of the book are about working on the oil spill response in the Gulf of Mexico. And I made these montages out of my sketchbooks as we went out to all the islands to help clean up oil. There's other episodes about storm response, about immigration. And if it's okay, I'm going to read a page of maybe kind of raw writing that comes from this. Nature confronts us with dilemmas. This is called bushwhacking. The wind rattles the storm windows, brings down wires. We go to sleep with a sense of order and wake to find ourselves on an island looking for an oar. We go to sleep thinking about how to rearrange the furniture and wake up finding the entire house adrift. Entering into nature, we hope to become more elemental. I survived the mishaps, leaving the path, following a deer trail up a ridge until the rocks and scree could no longer hold a footstep, little rock slides into crescendos of warning, or once leaning onto an outcrop over anemones amidst the surf and being knocked off my feet and inundated in terror. Once fording a stream halfway across, where giving up was pointless, my feet invisible, the force of the icy water and the slippery cobble making it impossible to find the next step. But also being many miles from a road and bedding down without a tent to awake powdered in snow on a knife edge between unbearable discomfort and impossible beauty. My breath formed a cocoon of ice encasing the nylon pulled taut around my face, crackling like glass in the dawn sun. Try to think of something impossible as a human in nature. We huddle in a narrow band of warmth and dryness near whatever makes a story of comfort. Read about being lost and unlucky. Recall the times you missed a fork in the trail and found yourself shivering in the last rays of the sun in the wrong valley, a canyon wall between you and the road. I know I got home well into the night, but by lucky accidents that I can't remember. Otzi the Iceman was mummified in the Alps for more than 5,000 years with an arrow in his back, a knife wound in his hand, geometric tattoos over his inflamed joints, and cooked ibex meat in his stomach. He had leather shoes and a bearskin hat and a bag of snacks on his belt, mostly seeds. As a firefighter, I had a folded fire tent under my belt, grain bars in my pocket, underwear made of cheap Mexican cotton, finely made eyeglasses under a pair of plastic goggles. A small notebook had sketches of redwood cones and the sun silhouetted on a steep fold fringed with cypress. Folded inside might have been a poem by Robinson Jeffers, the pacifist misanthrope, embodied by a hawk. In my stomach, government rations, so highly processed to fit in cans or pouches with ingredients from Vietnam, Chicago, South America. My first summer job in the coastal foothills, a partial wilderness called the Geysers, I was sent alone into a dense 8-foot chaparral to count lizards and snakes. A scientist dropped me off at the end of a fire road and pointed to a ridge probably no more than a mile away. Since I was the same person I am now, almost 50 years later, I know why I got lost. In the thickets, with the horizon invisible, I had no compass. I can't recall how I lost the trail, but I spent the day entangled, tearing my clothes in the coyote brush, seeing few lizards, wondering about rattlesnakes. Bushwhacking all day, I was never paralyzed by doubt, but my failing skills were an embarrassment that I hated to face. I found my way back by gravity, skidding downhill through the openings, going from oak to oak in a sea of brush. In a retelling of the story, the young King Arthur, the wizard turns the boy into a fish to learn about how to survive adrift in a world of predators and prey, the bearings unfamiliar, the odds suddenly making doom likely. But nature's more shrewd than a fairy tale. Every misunderstood snake or woodland human earned its place with a pelt, a spear, a tooth, enough to evade the weather or bring down much larger animals by finding their blind spots. As individuals, we are inept, getting hungry and lost, but as a band of foraging nomads, we wander everywhere, the most unlikely places, setting fires, spreading seeds, scraping goddess breasts into pottery, and leaving handprints deep in dark caves. Thank you.
I think we need a little bit more applause for Mark Adams. Thank you. And then can we welcome Mark and Jessica back up to the stage for a Q&A?
All right.
So just wait for Hannah to get to you
Hello.
with the mic
Is this working?
before you ask your question. Anybody have a question for our speakers?
First of all, thank you both. This is one of the best evenings here that we've had, so thank you. I'm sorry, your name just went out. Jessica, thank you. My question for you is, how did you come to the work you do? I mean, as someone who's just now getting to know who you are, and I'm very curious to know, as another Jew who's made a sort of circular route away and back, how did you come to this?
Okay, I'll try to give you the short answer. That's a good question. My first book is about the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, and I went out to the high desert of New Mexico and spent a month alone in a canyon. And if it tells you something, I was so secular at that point, I didn't know to go to the desert and seek was a religious act. Yeah. But I didn't have any. I stayed in a shack with no telephone, no internet, nothing, right? And all of these questions about what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to have purpose? What does it mean to live knowing we're going to die? Came in because I couldn't block them out. And when I left, I tried to go back to literature, and it felt really thin. And so I wanted to be in touch with a much more ancient wisdom. And that's when I started reading Torah. And slowly, and it's hard, right? It's hard when you come back to your own tradition as an outsider to find permission in. But that's one of the most beautiful things that I found is there's so many ways to be a part of these texts and these traditions. So that's a short answer.
Thank you. I have a question for Mark. When I saw the map outside today and also the One World, One Ocean project, I was thinking about Jacopo da Barbari's view of Venice, which is a 16th century map of Venice. It included all these mythological figures and distortions, intentional distortions, but appeared to be just entirely cartographic, and how that had such an impact on the experience of the city, how people move through it, the psychogeography of the city. And I'm wondering how much you've thought about the way the construction of a map informs how people move through a place and their relationship to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely in my thoughts. You know, especially when we think about indigenous knowledge, you know, that the maps that were created long before there was the science of coordinate systems and stuff and projections. And when you look at that spill house, you realize it's kind of arbitrary what we decided to center in our maps. I rolled out one of these maps at Goddard for an MFA program and invited the students onto it. And the first thing they said is, we don't trust maps. And I believe it. But on the other side, thinking of that Venetian map, you look at old maps and you look at sea monsters and ships and these invisible lines across the ocean. It's all information. The embodiment of the winds on the map has a personality, and it might actually tell important information about the character of the weather coming from that particular wind. I love even the biblical imagery has information in it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the very first images in Genesis is God's breath, the ruach, over the face of the waters. And that's part of how the separations begin. And you have to think about what was that primordial experience of land and water separating, which is why I love that map so much.
Yeah, and it's so, this kind of the spirit within the map is so ancient. Almost before there was language, there was a sense of that breath, whatever the breath is. People were looking for the breath. Anyway, I could go on and on.
Thank you both so much. This is actually a question for both of you individually, but if there's anything that comes up relating to each other's work as well, it's so interesting to have your work juxtaposed in that opportunity. And one of the things that really stood out to me was this relationship to time, the way that time, right, working with geologic time, working with also ancient texts, the beginning of the universe, right, that's so woven between the two of you, and the God of science, the God of tradition, not faith, as it were. So if you could all, and I don't know if there's a time where you remember not making work relative to the time-based material that you work with and how it's changed you or how it shapes you, but I'd just love to hear about how that moves through your work.
Well, yeah, actually, and the little book on the back about the landforms of Cape Cod and how that formed, which I assisted senior scientist Graham Giese, who's in his 90s now, and came here. He came here to resurvey surveys that were done in the 1880s. And then he redid those in the 1950s, and then he came and met me in the 2000s when we had GPS. He said, "Mark, can we redo this with the new technology?" He's a fantastic guy, but definitely standing on the shoulders and the shoulders and the shoulders. But one of the things he taught me is the world is full of clocks. I mean, the time, the cycles the systems that move things around in the land and the ocean are run like clocks. We have clocks in our brain, but the tide is a clock. The tide is run by this astronomy, and you could calculate what the tide's going to be on Tuesday 10,000 years from now. Obviously, there's all kinds of local factors of storms and forcing, but yeah, and I'm just always conscious, especially with a map, that it's a snapshot, that you can map something today, and but then with the traditions where we really want to like pin what we know to what was known, what was experienced. If you think of those 12,000 years of humans being here and only 400 years of recorded sort of science, that's 400 years since the Pilgrims is 12 generations, 12 grandparents. 12,000 years is about 450 grandparents. And imagine the stories handed down, the important knowledge. I don't know.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about everything you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I love with that map because you could tell me, yes, there were land masses, but to actually see it and then to imagine what it would be like to be able to just keep walking and then to see megafauna. Yeah, we live with bears in Asheville, so like that sounds terrifying, but kind of fun. I mean, I think that, there was definitely a time when I wasn't in touch with time in this way. And I think sitting with the Torah, and then especially sitting with Midrash, which is hundreds of years of rabbis writing into and about the text and from the text, and they're talking across geography and time. And so, one, it was an incredible thing to feel like I got to be in conversation with people that far, before me, and then hopefully maybe like a little bit might last past me. But one of the things that I found most that kind of shifted things for me is there's this idea of perpetual creation. And also like it could be called continuous revelation, this idea that any event that happened in the Hebrew Bible and the Torah is always happening. And if you want to talk afterward, there's some cool linguistic things that go with that. But it's always happening. And so it's almost like this radio transmission that is always going out, and it's, are you tuned into it? And so you can always drop back into time. And once that actually like started to become an embodied understanding, it felt I was unmoored in the best way from just being reactive to everything that happens right now. And to me, like, that's what your map did, is it let me think about not just like, what is it that I see right in front of me, but what might have been, what might become. And that's really helpful for me right now when things can be so terrifying, is to think that things are not happening for the first time, right? So and so like, how can we learn from what came before and not just keep repeating ourselves, but maybe just iterate a little bit better, and not just react immediately.
It's so interesting. Like, there's sort of human disasters and there's events in nature, and for nature, it's seldom a disaster. Nature has healing properties. It has, it can restore itself. We never quite learned that, I think, as a species. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think that it was both solace and then horror to see how ancient the things that we think of as like new terrible things that we do to each other. Like, I don't know, I'm sure some of you have The Handmaid's Tale. Yeah. Margaret Atwood talks about the fact that she wrote that in a divided Germany, and she gave herself the stricture when she was writing it that she could only use things that had happened, right? Which is terrifying to think about. So I don't think we're very good at the self-healing part of things. But I do think that like the work that you're doing is very helpful because it shows how much we've lost, and then maybe shows the reason why it might matter to like try to make changes in some way.
I was gonna. Oh, it's louder than I thought. It's not a fully formed thought, but Mark, I feel like in college I minored in like women, gender, and sexuality studies, but that was sort of in a very broad way. And something that I ended up doing a lot of research about was how, like, the formation of categories, whether geographic or racial or sexual, kind of like during and after the Enlightenment period, how that contributed to a lot of like harmful creation of categories. So I guess I'm just curious, like, how you think about that in your work as like a cartographer and someone who thinks deeply about maps and time and place, because I feel like the way that you engage with this material feels a lot more freeing and feels kind of outside of that. And I guess I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we make the categories for specific purposes, and sometimes they're not useful. We talked today in the class about, let's say you have a satellite image of the world, and then what you want to do is turn that into information, turn it into classes, turn it into a map. The map essentially answers particular questions, not every question. And you need to throw away so much information to just find out where the cedar trees are or where snakes can live. But also, I'm jumping, but another topic that, we look at space, we look at places, and we analyze them and draw them in the class. But someone once brought up the idea of queer space and how do we protect it? How do we keep that kind of level of freedom available to us? And I'm like, well, what is queer space? And I don't know what we tell the satellite in order to map that. But I do know there are things, there are parameters. I mean, I'm thinking like a scientist a little bit, but there's authority spaces. There's spaces that are kind of designed around control of behavior. And then there are freer spaces. There's also security in places. I don't know if I'm getting at any of your question, but that's the categories are fluid, and I don't know. What do you think? It's interesting that in something like the Bible, the Bible thrives on categories, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the first acts are acts of separation, right? That's how how we are here, and then how lonely that is, right? And there's a lot of writing in Jewish mysticism or Jewish theology that God created us because God needed companions, right? That there needed to be a relationship of some kind. But yeah, I think what happens though is a lot of times people are bad readers. I think they're bad readers of texts, and they're not careful readers of maps and things like that, and they start to think of them as fixed categories, like per your question, Hannah. And so I think one of the reasons, to answer your earlier question, that I was able to come back to Judaism is I went to sit down with a rabbi, and I said, well, what is your relationship to God? Like, how? And he said, well, when I have one. And I don't know what he said after that, because that was so like that a rabbi could say like, I don't know if I believe it, right? And that was such an invitation to me, was like, it's about how you are in the world, what you do. And I think that when we get so rigid about you have to say the right thing or be the right way, it's very damaging. And I feel like the same thing of like, we have to have these borders between us. And yeah.
I don't know if this is relevant, but I think of Elaine Pagels, and I'm an avid reader of her, and all of her books really seem to be getting at the core of the teachings and the original purpose of things, which is kind of a metaphysical purpose, but and I think that she has come to a point where she's maybe agnostic, and her faith is not defined by any particular dogma, but it allows her to enter into all the dogmas, and you can participate. You can participate in whatever rituals. Reading together is like the fundamental spiritual ritual.
Yeah, in traditional study in Judaism, there's something called Havruta, from the word haver, which is partner study. Haver means friend. And there's a teaching that when two people sit down to study together, the Shekhinah, the emanation of God, is with you. Like you are visited by the divine just by sharing. And it's the understanding that you need to be in dialogue, you need to be in relationship. You cannot just sit and do it on your own.
That's a relief to know.
I think we'll take one more question.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks so much. This is such an awesome conversation, and to have this dialogue is really fantastic. I think, Hannah, your question raised another question in my mind, which is interesting to ask the two of you, which is you both work with material and information and belief that sometimes can sort of skew in conversation towards objective truth, right? But I think as people are sort of looking at particularly information studies, the notion of authorship or subjectivity is sort of a big part of it. So how, as an artist or a poet, how do you actually bring your own subjectivity into conversations about objective truth? Sorry, that's a little...
You know, like the whole idea of having a separate arena for, so this idea of environmental autobiography, the way I like to do this exercise is to first just consider your influences, consider the places that shaped you, that gave meaning to your journey through the world, and let's just describe them objectively. You know, are they hot or cold? Are they light or dark? Are they colorful? Are they safe? Are they, and then bring in the story of what they mean. If we can separate that story of meaning from the then we don't. I don't know. I would hope that it keeps us from demonizing the wrong things. You know, you feel how you feel, and you know, if you're in a space that's scary or you feel insecure, you know, how do you rectify that? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
You're like, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, I think that one, I think just recognizing there is, I don't think there's an absolute truth. I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say, but because I think so much of it is where you put your attention and what you allow, like that objective viewpoint to observe and to see. This week, I'm seeing a lot of my class like nodding. We're talking about metaphors, right? So you have the tenor or the concept, I call it the driver, and the vehicle, right, which is like a concrete noun in some way. To me, a lot of times, like these stories in the Torah are the vehicle, and the way, or like a map, and to me, it's that subjective thing, that idea, that question, that then animates that and gives it life, right, and makes it move. And I think as artists, what we bring from our lives and then we meld into whether it's a visual art or a story or something you're researching, that is the thing that like we can do. That I don't know. It's hard for me to think of another art form that does that in the same way. Like I think that we can. It's just so powerful because then like you're not just writing scientific papers. I mean, you're giving people an embodied artistic experience of the climate of all of these questions. So.
Yeah, and also, you know, I think a lot about evolution, about us as animals, about what we are adapted for, and it's neither good nor bad, but I actually think that this whole idea of being in communication with other humans is the peak of evolution. That's what we're evolved to do. Every animal you can, I think.
Not on social media, but yes.
Well, no. Yeah, I mean, I don't have. Yeah, no. I mean, person to person, you know, in the room. But every animal, every sentient thing moves away from harm and towards well-being. And I think that's a fundamental principle of the universe. And we can go towards well-being, but we can also go towards fulfillment. You know, when does that happen? And what in our nature? There's this story of a foreign exchange student came to America from Ethiopia, and she was very unhappy. And then Thanksgiving came around, and she went, "Oh, this is what we do every week in Ethiopia. This is what humans are meant to do."
That's a good place to stop. With gratitude. And some gratitude for Jessica Jacobs and Mark Adams.